Hello, I'm Nancy Strickland from IT Mentors. This video on Ajax, Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, is part of a series on the Beta 2 release of Visual Studio 2010 and the .NET Framework 4. In the latest version of Ajax, version 4, you can create client-based Ajax applications using some new features that we're going to explain in this video. We'll talk about client-side templates, client controls, declarative instantiation, command bubbling, and live bindings. Ajax, which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, is a client-side web technology for creating interactive web applications. It lets an app get data from the server in the background while the existing page is still displayed. It's asynchronous, so the client isn't waiting for the data to be retrieved. And that's good in cases where you have a website with pages that include some content that's common to more than one page. Without a technology like Ajax, all the content would have to be reloaded every time there was a request for a new page, including the common content that's already on the client. That could be things like images that are on every page, things like logos maybe. And it would also be true of things like scripts and style sheets. But with Ajax, the app can do what's called partial page rendering, which means to request only the different content from the server so pages load faster and use less bandwidth. And that means Ajax can make an application faster and more responsive. And that also lets you hold on to JavaScript variables so it's easy to maintain state. ASP.NET Ajax, that's Microsoft's implementation of Ajax, lets you implement partial page rendering without writing client script. To do that, you identify the parts of the page that are updatable and you add them to a server control called the update panel. And then postbacks from controls that are inside the update panel will cause asynchronous postback behind the scenes and only a partial page update. Then a script manager control coordinates all the update panels on one page. Now traditionally, many people think of Ajax as server-centric, and you can certainly use it that way. In server-centric Ajax, the application uses asynchronous calls between the client and the server, like we said before, but the server actually generates the HTML content and sends it to the client. In client Ajax applications, the server passes only the data that's needed using JSON. JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation, is a lightweight format for data exchange. It's easy to parse and to generate for machines and humans both. It's a text format that's completely language independent, but if you're a C# programmer, the syntax is going to look familiar to you. So the server provides only the data using JSON, and the client provides the HTML markup to display that data. So that's what reduces the total bandwidth required, and it reduces the amount of data that has to be transferred to refresh a page so the application can respond to requests faster. Client templates are one of the new features of Ajax 4. They're what lets us do the rendering on the client so the server can worry only about the data. If you've used web forms before, then you recognize this first example up here. You have a server control with a set of properties that lets you define a template for content, and then you can bind data to it, and you use this to create dynamic user interface elements that are rendered server-side. Well, we want to still be able to create user interface dynamically, but with the rendering process done on the client. And ASP.NET Ajax 4 lets us do this. Define templates that are purely client-side. You write the markup you want with HTML and data binding expressions. So the second example here defines a markup template that the runtime can instantiate. It's an unordered list template whose content is a list item, whose content is the value of the name property of the JSON object that's bound to it. If you know WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation, you probably noticed that the data binding expression looks familiar. In addition to templates, ASP.NET Ajax 4.0 also introduces two new client controls, DataView and Data Context. DataView can be thought of as the JavaScript equivalent to a repeater list view and a details view. It lets you use a client template and then bind data to it. If the data is a collection, then the DataView will replicate an instance of the template for each item in the collection. If the data is a single JSON object, then the DataView will display only a single template, so that means you can use the DataView for both master and detail displays. It can be integrated with the data context, and it also allows command bubbling for select commands, which we'll look at later. The data context class is a general purpose proxy for communicating with services for data-centric operations. It'll work with any service that knows how to communicate with JSON data, and that includes WCF, Windows Communication Foundation, and ASMX services, and ADO.NET data services. The data context class also provides change tracking functionality, so it can keep up with what data needs updating, and that makes it easy to build a basic CRUD-based application, one that creates, retrieves, updates, and deletes records. The data context control is a connection between your client application and the server, and as we said, the server component can be represented by any JSON-compatible service like ASMX or WCF or ADO.NET data services, or a JSON result that's returned from an ASP.NET MVC model view controller application, or anything else that's JSON compliant. And then on the client, any JSON objects that were retrieved with a data context automatically are tracked for changes. So that means that the client can make any changes that it wants, and then when it uses the data context to save back to the server, the data context already knows what changes need to be saved and handles that for you. This demo comes from the training kit for Visual Studio 2010 Beta 2. It's a separate download from Visual Studio itself, and I've given you a link to the download site in the resources at the end of this video. We'll start by looking at client-side templates. I've already opened the starter project from the Visual Studio 2010 training kit, and the first thing I need to do is add the Ajax scripts to the scripts folder in the Solution Explorer. I've downloaded those from aspnet.codeplex.com and installed them right on my desktop just for the demo, so they'll be easy to find. So I'll right-click on Scripts and say Add Existing Item. Go to my desktop where I put the Microsoft Ajax folder. That's the one I unzipped. And then I'll add the files I need. I want Microsoft Ajax and Ajax Debug. And then down here a little way, I want Ajax Templates and Ajax Templates Debug. You see, let me add them. Here they are. You see there's two files with the same name. One has debug and one doesn't. They're basically the same, but the difference is that the debug version has comments and formatting, so it's easier to read. So you use it during development. And the other one has been made as small as possible. It's had the white space and the comments and extra braces and things like that stripped out. And it's smaller, so you want it during production. Now I'm loading them both because I'm going to register these scripts with the Script Manager control in just a minute, and then the Script Manager is able to use the appropriate version automatically depending on what's in the web config file. Is this a release version or is it a debug version that we're working on? Okay, so now I'm ready to add the Script Manager. I'll put it right here and I'll paste it in. This is what it looks like. So you can see that it's an ASP Script Manager. The ID is Script Manager, Server Control, and this Ajax Framework mode here, setting it to explicit, means that I'm going to explicitly reference all the scripts that I need. So that means the next thing I'm going to do is to paste in code for the scripts that I'm going to use. I'm going to put it inside the Script Manager tag, and there it is. Could be a little neater, I suppose. Here's all the scripts that I want. I've got Ajax and the templates. Those are the ones that I just added from the Ajax package. And then these next three actually already existed in the project. This one, jQuery, right here, was already there because it's automatically included with Visual Studio. It's got a lot of useful JavaScript methods that we're going to be using several times in the rest of this app. And then the other two are scripts that have custom code, the one called Custom Scripts and the one called Sample Data. They have custom code that was written for this app. In this case, the training kit demo has already put code in them for us. And now at the end of this default ASPX page, down here, it's going to go outside the form, but inside the body. This is where I'm going to paste my template to describe how to format that data. Here's my division tag, and the ID for it is details template. And this class here, this sys template, in the CSS style sheet, let me just open that for you so you can see it real quick. You can see that sys template is defined as display none and visibility hidden. So the HTML in here won't show, this HTML right here is not going to show to the user. But after the data binding is done, the Ajax runtime looks for that class name for systemplate and changes it to display it. Now right above this is the details container where this HTML is going to go when it's finally rendered. We'll see how to do that in a minute. But first, while I'm here, let me just show you over here on the style sheet that details container already has a lot of formatting set up. It's going to have a blue background and different parts of it, depending on what the tags are going to be yellow text or green text, and there's some other formatting. There's actually quite a bit of it if you start looking for the details container. That details container is going to end up being very fancy formatted. Okay, now let's go back to my ASPX. This template is going to have the data injected into it where these double braces are. So we'll have the name field right here in the first line, and then in the second line you can see that what's inside those double braces is actually a JavaScript expression, not just a simple property name or field name. So here, if the value that's in the reports, which is actually a property, a field, if that's null, then what will show is no, and otherwise it's going to show yes. Now, I haven't finished doing the code that's going to take this details template and put it in the details container where it's going to show, but I am going to go ahead and run it real quick for you right now. It'll make sure that everything is okay that we've done so far, and you can get a general idea of what the app looks like. There we go. So it says exploring the organization chart. I'll talk some more about this content in a minute, but if I click the buttons, you can see that nothing happens. There's no functionality, so now what I need to do is add some actions for these buttons. Let's close the app and do that. So back in my code, I can see where those buttons come from. They're both in input tags, of course, and they're embedded in the division whose ID is managers. Now I'm going to go to my scripts and open this custom scripts file and write some code to execute when one of those buttons is clicked. I'll put it right here. What I have here is the add load method, and that's so that it'll run as soon as the page finishes loading. And in it, I'm going to run a function. This is an anonymous function here, a lambda function. And it uses this $sign function right here, which comes from jQuery. The argument to it says, find the manager's element of the DOM, the document object model, and get all the elements inside it that are input elements. And then when any of those elements gets the click event, then call this fetch and show details method, which is what we're going to write next. I'll put that method right below, right here. What's happening in this method is, first I'm getting the details container division from the page. Now let me quickly click back over here and show you that the details container is down here. That's the container we're getting. It's part of the form that we talked about a minute ago. It's where we'll display details about the user's choice, but it doesn't have anything in it. That's going to be created dynamically by this code that we're writing right now. It does have formatting, remember, that was set up in the style sheet. Okay, back to my code. This next line here, clear container. If you look down here farther, here's the method it's calling, clear container method. And it just calls hide and empty methods from jQuery against that container object that's passed in. So this just clears out the container in case there's something in it from a previous rendering. And the next we're calling the getManagerWithID method, and we're sending it the name property here of the element that was the target of the click. We passed that event element in when we called it. That's an automatic argument to an event. So now we can go back down here to this code that was pre-written for us and find out how getManagerWithID works. It takes a manager ID as its argument, and then it does a for each loop here. That's jQuery syntax again, through a collection of managers to find one with a matching ID, and that's what's returned. Now I'm going to open the sample data script, we haven't looked at that yet, to show you this collection of managers. These are some Microsoft employees. In fact, all of these guys are Microsoft employees. You might know them already from videos or conferences or from the web. So that's the collection. This manager's collection is the collection that our for each loop is iterating through. Each item in that collection has an ID. There they are, 1, 2, 3, and 987. And if I click back to my default ASPX page, you can see that the name of those buttons, the name attribute of those buttons, corresponds to each of those IDs. So the name attribute of the button is the thing that we're going to be searching for here. That's what's getting passed in, the manager ID. And so that's why we sent the name of the target element, the element that got the click event, down here. Okay, so now manager has the manager that was clicked on, and now we're going to use the get methods here to get that detail template. That's a jQuery method again, and we'll pass that to the template constructor that's in the sysUI namespace. So now we have a template in this variable, and we're going to use its instantiateIn method to say to instantiate that template, the details template, inside the details container. Remember, that's what's in the container variable here, the details container, the one that's in the manager. The manager division, because that's where we want to see the data with the formatting specified in the template. Now let me mention that this getManagerWithID method here is calling local data. That's just a way to simulate a callback to the server where you would normally be getting the data from, and that's done so that this demo is a little simpler and we don't have to deal with data access. Okay, now I'm going to run it again because we've done the wiring up we needed to. And this time when I click a button, I get the details. And they're shown in the template and they're formatted. That was a really simple template because it only had to render one little thing. But we can also find a list of data. In this case, we'll bind a list of the employees who report to each manager. So to do that, we're going to use another new binding control, the DataView, because it can apply a whole list of data to a template and then automatically repeat the template for each data item in the list. The first thing I'll do is go back to my ASPX page, and I'm going to nest another template here. After has reports, so here I'm just going to print out the word report, sort of like a title, and then here's my nested template. You can see that the class name is sysTemplate again. It's going to create a bulleted list to display name and title. And now I'm going to bind that template to a list of data using a DataView by putting a little code in here. What I'm going to do here is paste in a call to the create method. It creates, as you can see, a data view here with arguments saying that the data should come from the manager reports property. Let me quickly go back to the sample data to show you that Phil has a null in his reports attribute here, and that Drew has reports in it, and reports refers to this collection which has 3 employees in it. There's also a couple of nulls here, and one of those is for events and one is for references, neither of which apply in this case. And then last, we show the template show the data view what template to bind its data to. It's the UL element that's inside the details container. Remember we assigned the details container to that. Now this function here is going to get all the UL elements that are inside the detail container. So that's a collection, so that's why we have this 0 in square brackets here, meaning get the first element of this collection of all the UL elements. Now, of course, in this particular case, there's only one anyway. Okay, now I'm ready to run it again. When I click on Drew here, I get a list of all his reports. When I click on Phil, I actually don't get anything. I get the header reports, but nothing else. So what I'm going to do now is add some conditional logic so that something prints out, even if the manager doesn't have any employees who report to him. First, I'll go back to my page, and I'll add another template that can be displayed if there is no reports. Notice that it's named warning message, and it just says it looks like, and then the name field has no reports. And now I'll go back to my script to add some custom logic, some conditional logic, so it'll display differently depending on whether there are reports or not. And the way I'm going to do that is to use a whole new function. It's called render reports. It gets passed to manager and the container, and then if there's nothing in the reports, then we're going to print out that then the data item itself will be manager, and we'll use the warning message as our template based on the manager. But if there are reports, then the data item will be manager reports instead of just manager, and the element that we're going to use to the template we'll use to format it is the UL. And then we'll create our data view based on the data item, which could either be the manager or the reports. And then this element is now a variable too, so we'll format it either as a warning message or as a UL. And now I just need to change the way fetch and show details works. So instead of doing the unconditional display here, I'll call the method that does the conditional display. And now I'm going to run it one more time. Drew should work the same, but Phil now has the conditional formatting. In the previous demo, we saw how to take advantage of the new client templates and controls imperatively in code. You saw that the amount of code required to do client-side Ajax is pretty small, but you can actually do the same thing, achieve the same functionality with a declarative approach where you often don't have to use any JavaScript at all for a lot of standard work, a lot of common scenarios. To declaratively instantiate controls and behaviors, you have to first map the controller behavior to an XMLNS, an XML namespace, in your HTML document. The value for the XMLNS is the fully qualified name of the control or the behavior that you're going to target. Then attach your control or behavior to an element to represent it. So here you see a div tag that uses the sysattach attribute. Now to get that you had to have imported the sys namespace, of course. And the value of the attached namespace is the name of the XMLNS that you assigned to the control or behavior in the previous step. And now you can use it. You can access its properties. Again, if you've used WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation, this is something like attached properties there. To see how this works, how to use it, we'll need a demonstration. Here's an example. Again, it's from the Visual Studio 2010 training kit of using Ajax declaratively without writing any JavaScript at all. The code creates all the controls and links them up just by declaring them in the web page. So let's look at it here. First of all, it's pure HTML. There's no ASP.NET at all. As I said, no code. Notice down here, though, that we do have a reference to the two Microsoft Ajax scripts, the same ones that we used in the previous demo. Then I'll go down here a couple of lines, and you can see the namespaces that are declared in the body tag. They define sys, and then the sys UE DataView control, which will have the namespace DataView, and then the sys activate, well, it activates declarative controls. And that lets me use some new attributes. So down here, you can see some of those new attributes. First of all, you can see that this is a template because of its class, and then sysattach DataView attaches a DataView to this tag, which is a template, right? And then we have our data provider here, where it's going to get its data from. This is a little web service that gets data about movies from a database that's here in the application. Remember, you can get this with the training kit and investigate it in detail if you want to. Here we've got the DataView data provider working with the web service, but it can be used with anything that returns JSON. So as we said earlier, it can be ASMX or WCF or ADO or several other things. AutoFetch here is set to true, and that means that the data should be retrieved immediately from the data source when the page loads. And then the DataView fetch operator here, along with the fetch parameter, that tells the control which operation, which method to call in the web service, and which parameter to pass along with it. And then just below it, here is my template with the three fields it's going to display: title, director, and date released. This is a movies database. And that's all I had to do. I can run it now without any server-side code, no JavaScript at all. Watch. And there you go. It's got the data. So quick and easy. In web forms, there are some server controls like button and link button that you can associate with a select command. And then parent controls can be aware of certain types of commands and can respond to them regardless of what it was specifically that triggered the command. ASP.NET Ajax 4.0 lets you do this same thing in JavaScript. You can apply the syscommand attribute to any element, and then when that element is clicked, it'll bubble that command up its DOM tree, so parent controls can watch for certain command types and respond to them. An example of that is the DataView control, which is aware of the select command, and that means you can make any element in your template your click handler. We'll see a demo of how that works in a minute. Live bindings bind two objects together for synchronization. The two objects can be client controls or behaviors or UI elements or just any JSON objects. Bindings let you do several types of synchronization. The default binding type is one-time binding, in which the source object will synchronize a property value with the target only at the time that the binding occurs. One-way binding keeps the target object constantly up to date with the source whenever it changes. And Two-way binding couples the source and the target so that a change on either end automatically causes a change in the other also. Command bubbling just refers to the fact that a control can detect an event that happens to one of its child controls. So you can click a button on a form view control and the event will bubble up from the button to the form view, and then the form view control can handle it. The training kit has an example of command bubbling here. It's the same application that we just saw in the last demo using Declarative Ajax. But now we've added, as the last attribute down here in the T-body tag, another attribute, DataView selected item class. Now that's set to row selected, so that up here in the style tags, right there, you can see that what row selected is going to do is turn the background color yellow. So when an item is selected, it's going to be formatted as this class instead of the default formatting. And then we have to add another another attribute that we add to the row, and that's the sys command equals select. That lets the row know that when it's selected, it should apply the selected style. Okay, now I'll run it. And you can see that as I click, the row knows that it's been selected. It receives that event, and that event bubbles up to the template, which knows that the selected item's class should change to one that has a yellow background as its style. That's a pretty simple use of bubbling just to demonstrate it, but the ability to bubble can be used to do more elaborate things, like when you click on a row in a master table, bind a detail table, and then display that. And now let's look at a live binding demo. Up until now, when we've put data into a template to be rendered, we've been using double curly braces around the name of the data field, the data property. And this does one-way, one-time binding. The data from the data source is bound to the rendered data value on the page once. If the underlying data is changed, then nothing changes about the way the page looks. The rendered data on the page doesn't change. So what we're going to do in this new version of the application is to add live binding. Down here, right here, in this table row, the detail here, instead of having title in double curlies, I have single braces and the word binding in front of the name of the data field that I want to display. Now I have two data views. Here's this one data view up here. There's the end of it. And then I've got another one down here. It's also a template. The top one, as you can see up here, shows the title only, but this one shows the title. Well, actually it shows the title once in the legend, and then it shows the title again right here, and the director. And in this second data view, you can see that I have a binding thing here that says binding the selected data and the source is the master. Then if I look up here in the first data view, I can see that the sys key is master for it. Now because I put binding in front of these pieces of data here in the various places, well actually not director, it's just the title that we're going to be interested in here. Because I put that in all three places, they're all bound together so that changing one changes the others. Let me run it and show you. Okay, so up here I have my data view that has titles only, and I can select a movie there. And when I do, I get the legend here and then the title and the director down here. Now because this is live binding, if I make a change down here, see these are text boxes, so I can change them. When I make that change and click away from it, see that it changes everywhere else. It changes here in the legend, and it also changes up here in the base, the master table also. And that's because I've live bound all three of those. Now let me make a little change. Up here in the top, I'm going to take that binding off. I'll put my double curlies back in. Okay, let's run that again now. And this time, if I try to make a change down here in the bottom, it will change these two because they're still bound together. I left the binding on both of those, but I took the binding off here, so it's not changing. Here are some more resources you can use to learn more about ASP.NET Ajax 4. This first URL is the home page for Visual Studio on MSDN. It has a link to the download site for Visual Studio 2010, which is now in Beta 2, and it's also got links to documentation and other help. And then at the second link, here's the URL for the Visual Studio Training Kit. As I'm recording this, the latest release was in January of 2010. It has presentations and demonstrations and hands-on lab, and I've referred to it a couple of times during this video. And the next link here is the Ajax site on ASP.NET. It's got downloads and videos and tutorials, documentation, sample apps, user forums. It's got everything. And a lot of the videos are the short little how do I videos that can be really helpful when you just need a quick answer. And the main site for downloading the Microsoft Ajax library is this last link. It can also help keep you up to date on everything about ASP.NET. The source code for my demos from this video and others are being posted on my blog at the URL shown up here. I'm also using Twitter to announce as new videos or code gets posted. So if you'd like to know what's coming out when, follow me on Twitter at nstrickland1. And that's it for this session on Ajax. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.